Welcome, everybody, and thank you for being here tonight for our panel discussion on the dirty business of oil companies with cultural sponsoring. So we're here to talk about something many cultural institutions would rather ignore, the fossil fuel industry's grip on art and culture. Because while Austria celebrates its rich cultural heritage, the question we must ask is who's paying for it and what does it cost? So, maybe for a bit of context, for decades, companies like OMV have sponsored museums and galleries across this country, from the Kunsthistorisches Museum to the Viennese State Opera, and thus buying social legitimacy while continuing to fuel the climate crisis. But we say this isn't generosity, it's a strategy, it's greenwashing, and culture is being used as a cover. But people are fighting back, and this is why we are here. I'm going to be moderating this discussion. And as some examples, we have Darren from Liberate Tate. And Liberate Tate took direct action inside the Tate Gallery, staging powerful performances that exposed BP's toxic influence on the arts. And they didn't ask for permission to do this, they demanded accountability. And right here in Vienna, which is why we have our second guest here, Florian, Letzte Generation brought that exact spirit to the Leopold Museum, staging a bold protest inside a climate-themed exhibition, calling out the hypocrisy of displaying environmental art while accepting fossil mines. And our last, not least guest, is Anna here for Verein Werbefrei, who are advocating for ad-free public spaces in Austria, and they also have a focus on banning fossil fuel ash. So, in this discussion, we do want to talk about if we can really talk about justice, sustainability of future generations while letting polluters write the checks. We want to ask, where do we draw the line? Can fossil sponsoring be considered ethical? What kind of culture do we want to build? And how can we free this culture from the influence of industries driving ecological collapse? So first, I've already introduced you a little bit, but now I'd like to ask all three of you to give the audience a quick introduction yourselves, because I think you can do it best. Maybe Darren, if you'd like to start.
Sure.
You also have the multimedia.
Something up.
Hi, so try to give 10 minutes or so of a little intro to some of the history of this project I was a part of. It's been a little while actually since the project wound up due to it being successful. But so in 2009 I joined a workshop in London at the Tate Galleries. Do you guys know the Tate Galleries? I guess everyone has some awareness of the Tate Galleries at least. So, in the UK, the biggest gallery, biggest museum, 4 main institutions across the country, but obviously Tate Modern, very iconic gallery in a former power station in central London. They have a budget of 190 million, something like that. So every year, so pretty big institution. So in 2009, I joined a workshop hosted at Tate by art activist group, maybe others will also know of, Laboratory of Insurrection Reimagination, by renowned artist activist character in the UK, who's now at Letzte, but called John Jordan. And so there was a weekend workshop about art and activism, and Tate were very excited to host this real activists at a workshop at Tate. So I just joined into this group, and it was a kind of classic workshop environment, and but it got quite interesting during it because Tate were very enthusiastic to have real activists there, and whatever that meant. But at a certain point, as the conversations went about what should we do in the workshop, gradually progressed, without realising what they were doing, the curators sort of told us that brilliant if you're going to do something, but nothing can be directed at Tate or any of its sponsors. So, of course, as you can see even here, one of the key sponsors at Tate at the time was BP. And so what then began to emerge out of this workshop was that it was a bit like a red flag to a bull, and so certainly the group decided that they weren't okay with being told not to do something, and that was censorship, and that therefore we would try to do something. So out of this, a very modest action began, which was just at the time. It wasn't particularly. The internet's gone down. So anyway, just to try and introduce it, that's how it began. So essentially, at the point that just at the end of the workshop, we managed to make a very small action using our workshop paper, and we managed to get Art Not Oil put onto a small statement put onto the gallery. But out of this, then a group began to form and have some conversations, and then shortly after this, of course, came the Deepwater Horizon oil spill in the Gulf of Mexico. Sorry, Gulf of America. At this point, the group began to say, well, hang on, what's going on? How can it be that our national collection is endorsing a company to be polluting like this and being so involved in the destruction of our planet? We began to educate ourselves about what was going on, and we drew on a lot of work here from Platform, a group in London, pressure group in London, who've done a lot of work to inspire what we took forward. But this is a little helpful introduction to the carbon web. So whilst we find it might seem like a very small image you see in the gallery, a little corporate logo, but behind all of that, of course, is this huge, great tapestry of strategy. And so you can see here, down here in external affairs, you can see a little link to cultural institutions, and as part of this web of what allows oil to be extracted and sold, and that business and those profits to be maintained, they need to do everything they can to keep that alive across, the banks that fund it, and how you promote that and how you get your PR right. And so, as a group of activists, you can see this as a web, but we also understood it as a chain, and we felt like in this chain, having cultural institutions as one link in that chain, we felt like that was a weak link. And so we got to work on it, hammering at that chain, at that link. And so after we got stuck in and opened up a whole series of performances and interventions, I can try and jump through a few of those very briefly. When Deepwater Horizon began, Tate hosted a summer party with BP to celebrate, and it was a corporate event. They invited there was lots of BP's kind of members there and celebrities, but we turned up with a whole load of oil and got secret invitations into the gallery, into the party, and some of us went in and released oil within the party, and a lot of us got involved on the entranceway, and brought a bit of a different story to what this whole event was about for them. So this was one of our kind of bigger beginning pieces, and then we gradually got over the 6 years we built a whole series of works. 17 different pieces as a broad collective, hundreds of people involved sometimes. This was one of the key, most iconic pieces where we got hold of an old wind turbine blade, which we bought from a farmer, and cut it up into 3 pieces, and then installed it in the gallery. None of our works were sanctioned. All of our works were clandestine operations and involved us forcing our way into the gallery to make sure that this conversation happened within the gallery. There's really funny and good movies around this, which we can't look at in this timescale. So that was one. There was, and what else? This is another one, which is pretty iconic. Hold on a minute. This is another one we joined in with one of Tate's exhibitions, which was called Human Form, and so we bought our own human form, and you can see here how the gallery staff are closing us off to accentuate the work at the time. And we did pretty well out of that. We got the front page of the Financial Times from that action, which cost us £100 to produce that piece of work. And another piece here, parts per million, where we ended up creating just talking through the different parts per million of the years as we walked through the gallery exhibits, how the parts per million of carbon had risen every year as we walked through this exhibit. Again, involving over 100 people. Another piece here, we occupied the gallery overnight. We occupied it at high tide on one day, and then stuck in there and brought in texts about climate and art and activism, and wrote out texts about the climate crisis in charcoal all across the gallery floor. And we occupied that, this durational piece, occupied that for 24 hours until high tide again the next day. We had to get pretty creative in a lot of these works, and then it got really stepped up until there was this is a piece here called Birthmark, whereby we created a tattoo parlour in the gallery, and we again worked on this parts per million figure for each the year of everyone's birth date of where the carbon was at in the atmosphere, and created a tattoo parlour, and hundreds of people took these onto their arms, and it became a bit of a movement. So we created a lot of pressure. We also ran a campaign and took Tate to court. We did a freedom of information request to allow us to try and ask, how much money are you actually getting? Tate kept that secret as commercially sensitive information, and we felt like that really wasn't how it should be. This was the national collection. This is public good, and the interests of BP's donation to the Tate galleries was not something that really should be kept commercially sensitive. And so we took them to court, and we won the case, and they had to reveal their funding amount, and it was pretty shocking. So they ended up, on average, it seems like they were donating in the region of 0.15% of Tate's annual budget. So, an eighth of 1% of their annual budget BP was giving 225,000 a year to gain pretty enormous profile for what that is. And so amongst this, it gets a bit revealing, and this is perhaps what we can go on to speak about how this, what's actually going on when an oil company sponsors a cultural institution, and gaining a bit of a sense that there is this social license to operate. So companies that are doing such destructive actions as BP were need to find a way to keep that image clean and keep it progressive. BP had this rebranding at one point where it rebranded as Beyond Petroleum, and like they were going to go off down some renewables route. And of course we didn't believe them at the time, but lots of people tried to believe them and went with it. But they're just a machine. They're just a capitalist machine to make a lot of money. And even if you have a progressive CEO, they will be booted out so that the machine can keep making maximum profit. And one of the key ways they can do it is by gaining positive association with cultural institutions. And there's a lot of classic conversation that will happen about. A lot of people think, well, it's good if an oil company gives money to something positive, isn't it? It's like missing the point that actually it's a way that dirty money can be cleaned. And so we've, as a bunch of activists and artists, we were pissed off. We were outraged by this, and we found a way to bring together our mix of outrage and creativity and intervene. And so it was a bit of a different way for activism to happen, and it was a bit of a different way for art to work. And so for me, it was a real coming together of different ways of working. Because this was happening within culture, it changed some of how we were motivated to work, and changed some of how we could communicate this, and how everybody who was observing the protest could understand the subject and get involved in it. And I think this is it's an interesting way for activists to understand how to be effective, if you like, but it's also, for me, a deeper process of us getting involved in the challenges of us in our society creatively, and in a deeper context. I think finding ways to work with these things, which are campaigns and protests and these edgy fights, in a way that is also a creative process that we can pour our hearts and souls into, our outrage into, our joy into, our creativity into, I think gives us a really interesting way to be able to actually work at quite a deep way. We need to have these deeper conversations in our society about what we're doing. It is more than just a protest. We really cannot afford to just push these conversations to the side because it's inconvenient to have it, or it's too difficult for museums to have these conversations. So I'll shut up, and that was some of the story going on, and we'll see how we can interact with it later on.
Maybe we continue with you, Florian. Maybe for Anna.
Okay.
Maybe if you wanna add on to like the context of Austria or Vienna.
So we didn't have originally the intention to address this issue of fossil company sponsorship of art institutions, but of course it was a very welcome chance, because we were searching for opportunities since, I don't know, a couple of weeks at that time, because the broader perspective would be that in Austria, first people around Martha Krumpeck started in February of 2022 to glue themselves to the street and bring in that protest that started in London with what was it?
Just Stop Oil?
No, the thing before.
Extinction Rebellion?
No, in between. Insulate Britain.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Yeah. And yeah, the Germans did it, the French just started, Italian guys tried some crazy stuff on highways, and then Marta came up with the thing after this occupation of a very important construction site of a street in Vienna. And when I came to the still very small group, our problem was that we didn't, we couldn't get into the Leitmedien, so the big newspapers. We were just in Boulevard, like the Sun magazine or something. It's called Heute and in Austria. So the big media didn't take us serious, and they didn't want to care about this filthy stuff we did. And we knew from the other groups, from Britain and Germany and Netherlands, that if you go into the museum and do such a little spilling exercise, that all the intellectual feuilletonists, the cultural people, they get interested and write about it, and everybody has to have an opinion and also put it in the public. And that was our actual goal of that thing. And then it went very big. So it went much bigger than the thing with the sunflowers in the Netherlands and the thing in Potsdam in Germany. I guess because of that connection to art sponsorship and OMV, Austrian fossil fuel company. Because the others didn't have this connection. If you remember, they had like tomato soup and smashed potatoes and stuff, and there was this problem of linkage to the art. And even though I think Phoebe, the colleague in London, she did it very well, because she just shouted one sentence: what's worth more, art or life? And that's of course a rhetorical question, but it creates a huge tension as a question that you can't answer. But yeah, so it turned out to be a huge success. It happened on November 15th, I think, in 2022. And then the mobilization of people ready to glue themselves to the street became a whole different game in Austria. So we were able to do our first mass protest in Vienna in January, double the number in February, and again double it in May. Just on that, so for me, in retrospectively, it's been that museum thing that gave us this, a whole different image. And also that like it made us appear on the front page of very big newspapers. I had the chance to have a Streitgespräch, so a fight in a podcast of a leftist weekly newspaper in Vienna. And the guy really performed great for our cause, because he was super pissed. He was really behaving badly, saying like, you boy, you don't know what you do, it's dangerous for you, better get help. And I was all nice and being polite and friendly and stuff. And yeah, it turned out really well for us. And in the end, the somehow initiative, I guess, for this event is also that the same director, around 2 years after this protest, stopped sponsorship by OMV.
Yeah.
So of course he never talked about his reasons publicly, but I think inside his little old heart it might have worked a bit.
I should drop in. didn't conclude to say that Tate dropped its sponsorship with BP in 2016, and it was the same story. There was no announcement that it was anything to do with our work, but it was totally clear that that's what had happened. So.
And then just a few more facts on the timeline. They tried to sue us, so the director was really mad, and he made his lawyers try to sue us for trying to severely damage the thing. But then the state attorney of the Viennese court said, no, that's not going to happen, because it's obvious that these guys were very careful and didn't want to destroy anything, and also didn't destroy anything. So then we just had to pay 2,000 euros of cleaning cost. And we were like, okay. No problem at all, because we did a funny fundraiser saying, please, finally the museum is paying their cleaning staff very well. Help them, and it was, I think, 4K in less than 1 day. And then we had to be we had to be safe and don't do such crazy stuff again for 2 years. Otherwise they would have sued us. But that was all we were really lucky compared to people in Sweden and the US. On the legal side, we didn't have any troubles. Yeah, I guess that's the most important things. And yeah, there have also been international interest. New York Times also interviewed me on the phone. The Guardian interviewed me on the phone. It was a huge ego trip also for me. Yeah. Okay, I think that's all I want to say for now.
Thank you.
Just a very short question. What was the actual action? Was it the gluing to the skeleton of the dinosaur? Or was it
sorry, I totally forgot.
Why you selected this day?
Sorry.
It was important.
Okay. So every year, up until last year, on Leopoldi Tag, so Leopoldi is a Catholic saint, and it's on this day. And
the museum is called Leopold Museum.
Yeah, Leopold Museum, because the founder of the collection is Mr. Leopold. And yeah, very creative idea by OMV and Leopold Museum to give free entrance to everybody, sponsored by OMV on this day. And the only thing they wanted the museum to do is to put their logo and their colors and their clean and shiny look on the museum. Yeah. So that was the linkage to this sponsorship. And then we also used oily liquid. We didn't use real oil because
charcoal and sunflower oil.
No. That's actually funny. It was
This is trade secrets.
a thing to color pools.
Yeah.
Yeah. So if you want to have your pool water black, you use this stuff. Yeah. And then we put guarkern meal, so just some vegan option for baking, I guess. Yeah, and Martha mixed it up, and we tried it in my bathroom. Yeah. And I put it in a Wärmflasche, so that you use when you have a bad stomach. And hid it under my pullover. Oh, yeah. And the very poor young guy at the entrance, because they were very alert, and scaling up security and stuff, and we had to stand in a line, and people were even touched by security people, and he was looking at me, and then looking at my fake belly, and then with his finger he was slowly touching it, and then he looked at me and said, "Oh, sorry." I don't know what he thought, but yeah, I was sweating a lot in this moment. Yeah, then we went in, we walked around a bit, we checked on our colleagues who had the camera and microphone and everything. And then it was a very Mission Impossible kind of situation, because there was 2 security people walking through the room like this all the time. So I had to find my perfect second to unclose, get this bottle, reach the painting and spill it.
The painting.
Yeah, it's Gustav Klimt, Tod und Leben.
Dead and Life, yeah.
Dead and Life. So you see in front of a very black and dark background. You see the death Sensenmann, a skeleton with a mowing thing, and you see life in all its blossoming and happy, and they ignore what's happening around them. So it's for 90% of it was just luck. So we didn't I'm impressed by your organization things and planning things, because for us it was a thing of somebody had the idea because of OMV sponsorship. Somebody went in there, found the painting, and then somebody said, let's use this oily liquid. And then they asked me, and I said, okay, I'll do it. And that happened in 2 days. Yeah. So we kind of stumbled into this success. Yeah. Okay, now I think I told you.
Maybe quickly, Anna.
Yeah.
More the topic itself that is.
Yeah,
that is your
I keep it
expertise.
short. So I'm here today for the Verein Werbefrei, and we are based in Graz, and it's an association that started about 5 years ago, and I joined maybe 1.5 years ago. And we were inspired by other movements that want to ban fossil ads in general, especially in public spaces. And yeah, we try to do it not with so much like activism as you do, but more with make it visible who is like allowed to advertise in public spaces, like car industry or oil companies, or and also we are also concerned about cultural sponsorship, and because we, or most of us in the group, also have a kind of a background in the cultural scene. That's it.
Now we're kind of done with the introductions, but I feel like we've heard a lot. And now I'd also like to encourage you three, and I think you've already started doing it a bit, to also ask each other questions. So maybe if something comes up right now, you could ask. Otherwise, I can start and maybe something comes up.
How did you manage to not getting sued and put into prison?
Well, it's again, being in the gallery with these works, every time that we did something, we were prepared to be arrested, prepared to go to jail, we had our bus cards, we had our houses clean, we were ready, ready to be in trouble. So every time it was an enormous push to be prepared to do that, and for some more than others, and everybody made their choices. Am I someone that's able to do this and prepared to do this? And each work was a different group and a different assessment. However, we actually made a calculation earlier on that this was going to be more of a difficult question for the gallery than it was for us, because the question really is, for the gallery, is do we want our brand to be seen to be slamming the public, censoring the public in favour of an oil demon? And of course, this is exactly what needs to happen. This conversation, forcing that, is what needs to happen, because all the time that you don't force people, you don't force the meetings inside the Leopold or inside the Tate they can avoid this subject, it means they keep carrying on. So at the point they would have to say, okay, do we want to get the police in? Do we want to sue these people? At which point that's just very bad press, I think. And so that's what happened. That's how it played out with Tate. And some of the other institutions, in London there was 17 institutions that had, all the key institutions had oil funding, Shell, BP primarily. And now there's one left that has very little. And that's all poured out through different campaigns on the museums and galleries and festivals. From different things have happened. But I think they've all been forced to confront this. And some of the museums took a more aggressive stance and began to push back and say, we will sue. And then they all backed away from it because, of course, it's just bad press. And at the point that they've accepted that they don't want to sue, so long as you can create work that is provocative enough to make it be taken seriously, but not so much that it is, is causing actual damage or is, illegal or unethical, then you're in this realm. And this is why I think we talked about this weak link in the chain, in this huge carbon web, this web that enables fossil fuels to carry on. The cultural sector is actually a really special place to be able to work if we want to create as much change as we can with the minimum amount of effort, because it's hard for them to resist it, to avoid the conversation. And so that, I don't think we necessarily understood all of that when we went into it, but that certainly emerged along the way. And as a result, once we understood that, it was kind of it was all over. It was just like it had to unravel. And so something's begun here, and if there is still a need for it in Austria, which I'm sure if there isn't now, probably there will be, it could continue to be something can help unravel the legitimacy of fossil fuels.
Yeah, I think that's, now I understood that it's, the difference might be that you deliberately aim at the institution Tate, and we had problems explaining that we did not, because our message was, listen to climate science. It's much worse than politics tells you and media tells you. And then, of course, we said Leopold Museum is also bad for taking money from OMV, but that wasn't our main topic. So we actually, in our own communication, we always tried to focus on the one thing and explain that the museum was not our target. So then the whole, like in the public, many people got confused and had the question, yeah, but then don't go into the museum if it's not your target.
That's right.
And that whole thing came up, and that problem you wouldn't have.
That's right.
And that's also the reason why we couldn't count on the museum on like stepping back from suing, because they haven't been in the center of the attention.
Okay. So yeah, you took a bit of a different approach, and that was similar with Just Stop Oil and also with Insulate Britain. It was creating an ethical spectacle, finding a way to just get attention about this subject.
Yeah. So did it? That's not. Can I ask another question? So did you also have the problem of explaining why museums can be target of such an attack? Because that was the framing of in public in Austria, that we attacked the museum, or we attacked art.
Well, in our case, not really in the context of climate. I mean, one of the key things that we had was, at the moment, or back when BP was sponsoring the National Collection, if you were a member of, if you were a citizen wishing to go and see your art, you had to be complicit in climate crime to be able to go in, because you are you're going into a gallery that is partly funded, and there's a branding of climate science. And so we were like, this isn't okay, so therefore we're going to do something about it. We didn't need to go and have that conversation in court, because we found enough of a creative way to force this conversation to happen. And then eventually it came through, and that is one of the things with culture. I mean, in this conversation I read the text from Festival, and there was this reference to there was a discussion about culture's ecological footprint and culture's political handprint.
Yeah.
And so it's a kind of good combination of ways to understand it. And the impact of culture's handprint is, of course, enormously much bigger than its footprint in terms of, cleaning up its energy provider and putting your LED lighting in, and so I think that's why if you can take action within the cultural sector any which way you can, and if there's a fossil funder, then yes, you are asking, you're insisting that it's not okay for there to be fossil funding, but you're also, because of what culture is, enabling this conversation to happen across society, because culture is one of the places where it's progressive, we talk about ideas, we enter deeper into what are we doing as a culture, and we force that conversation to happen.
Maybe one question for Anna, because you did say that you also kind of work in and around culture. Maybe do you have any experience speaking with people in the culture sector or also policymakers on this topic? What are kind of the inside responses, voices?
I mean, I had the feeling it, for sure, with like political institution, it depends who you're talking to. Like in our case, we were talking about not advertising fossil things in Graz, they were kind of, nice and open. So, but it was maybe just luck in that case. But in general, personally, working in the cultural field, I had the feeling that most of the cultural institutions have an ethic approach, and they want to do something good for like society, education, the planet, whatever. But then they sometimes still accept money from whoever. Also, I mean, it was also, I think, in this discussion at the Festwochen that they also talked, okay, sometimes it's not directly like the fossil industry, but maybe some banks that are connected. So how far do you go? Where do you draw a line? What is still like a sponsor that is okay or not? And for example, just for speaking for Austria, there you have this Österreichische Umweltzeichen. It's a certificate a museum can get, or a lot of cultural institutions do have. And there are regulations for, I don't know, everything. Like you said, the building, where you get your energy from, the food you provide, everything. But there's nothing written about sponsorship. So maybe that's something still missing, because it's not so. And I also had the feeling, I think we probably look when we go to a museum who are the sponsors, because it's in our interest. But I'm not sure if like the regular visitor really gets who is the sponsor. They just like go in there and see the exhibitions.
But it's subtle. It's very subtle how it works. You know?
But I think that's the important thing about like something you did at the Tate, that you bring it to the public, and people, they probably didn't realize that PP was involved in the Tate before, probably, because it's not like it was probably written on the Leopold. I mean, on that day it was really obvious, but maybe people don't want to see it, or I don't know.
One of the things that would regularly be said when we were challenged is people, one of the things it would said, I don't think anybody's going to go to a BP petrol station just because they went to the Tate gallery today. But this misunderstands what's going on with PR campaigns and these vast budgets that allow social license to operate, to continue, and whether it's an oil company or whether it's any kind of company that's doing anything not so desirable, there's all how that part of the web of legitimacy is enabled is subtle. So people go, they don't notice that they've seen it, but it sort of subtly influences your sense of what this company is about. It's branding.
Maybe as time is proceeding, there have already been some questions from the audience, but maybe we have some more. In case there are, I would like to let you know that this is being recorded. So if you don't want your voice on the video or the file, just let us know, then we can cut it out. But if you're fine with it, then just ask your question, if there are any.
You said that one institution still has a sponsor from the oil industry. Who is it?
Forgive me if I'm not exactly accurate on this now, because I'm not a specialist on all of it. But it was either the British Museum or the Natural or the Science Museum or someone, and they got a bit. I mean, it got crazy because it was like BP and Shell sponsoring in climate crisis exhibitions, and it just got really, it couldn't be a stronger hypocrisy. But a lot of amazing work happened with lots of different groups, BP or not BP. There was a kind of theatre group that took on the Royal Shakespeare Company. They took on anyway. But yeah, when you got a science museum and it's the directors of the science museum rigorously defending themselves, protecting their sponsors. It got pretty bizarre. But when you see the nature of how strongly people defend their sponsors, you then start to realise why we've got such a problem. It's just so deeply ingrained in how it's done. And so one of the things we talked about was maybe that there's cultural differences. What works in the UK is perhaps different for what would work here in terms of challenging these structures.
So that's a difference because in the UK the museums are mostly free entry because of the sponsors, so they're much more visible than in Austria, for example.
It's not quite as clear cut as that. It was a policy change back during Tony Blair's time to make it free, which was good. But government funding is, I don't know how it varies across all of the institutions, but Tate, it's 60% or so is government funded. The rest is from various means, and there's lots of corporate sponsors still with Tate that we wouldn't choose as the best companies in the world, but it's for us coming from an environment context, we were like, we need to get to work to delegitimize fossil fuels directly, and then we can progress up to a more ethical sponsorship with time.
But where do you draw the line here between?
I think there's also other questions.
Airline sponsoring good or bad? Or where do you draw the line?
Yeah, it's a problem. Tate has a BMW sponsorship.
One more question.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for the interesting insights. I think my question directs on the idea of visibility, kind of, because we talked a lot about museums, right? You have to go into the museum, then you see like this little tiny sponsored by. But then, like, what about other cultural activities? For example, having public space, like festival. I mean, obviously they. I don't know if they're sponsored by me. I guess not. But like, maybe some other thoughts on like cultural happenings that are outside of the museum buildings. So if you could share some thoughts about that, and also more like direct, because sponsoring is one thing, right? And then I thought about, are there any other like more obvious advertisements or less obvious ones, like in the exhibition and in the art that some museums do? If you have observed that like any companies or any topics were involved that are relevant to companies there, or for example, if you have observed anything more obvious than just sponsoring like direct advertisements outside of the buildings or whatever. So I guess my direction is for like in terms of visibility and subtleness kind of.
There were certainly cases in London where it became apparent that there was the interests of the companies were involved in some of what exhibitions were coming along, and I'm not sure I can recall the exact example, but there was like part of cleaning up a story ahead of BP going into another region in parts of the Middle East or in parts of Africa, where they'd create a progressive, they'd fund an exhibition that was about, all these, they'd fund an exhibition which would create a positive association for them with that region. When actually, and then you'd get in and unpack it and you discover quite the opposite. So there was a bit of this, but then I got the feeling that they had to sort of, once they realised that they'd been busted, they had to sort of retreat from this stuff, this more direct buying out of the story. That's some of what you asked. That's not all of it.
Yeah. So the curation, for example, then would also be like one medium. I was just like thinking about other entry points than pure sponsoring for.
Yeah. So what I learned from Olga Kronsteiner, standard journalist, who used the occasion of our protest to bring out a nice piece on the connection between the museum director of Leopold Museum, Hans-Peter Wipplinger, and Wolfgang Sobotka. Back then the boss of the ÖVP. And then Nationalratspräsident, so a big gorilla in Austria, in the right-wing Austria. And that's obviously the reason why he's become the director. Because Mr. Sobotka likes to be very cultural and have the art around him. And he puts his friends on top of the big art institutions. So that's also a way I think this thing to work, because then you have Sobotka, and on the other side of Sobotka is Raiffeisen and OMV. So all his friends are inside there and making money. And then you can, like, it's in Austria, it's also very like boring, because it's just old white men who are friends.
It's not so different.
Yeah, I mean that's in a lot of countries.
That's the world.
Yeah, probably. But yeah, in Austria, it's really they've gone to school together, and then it's yeah. And then the other side that I was thinking of, and many people told me, is the art market. So if there is like the same old white men owning all the money, and guys like BP and stuff who influence the big houses on what they show and what they don't show, then you also influence the demand on the art market. So everybody producing art will also be reacting to like just maybe having a little sort of what can I be successful with. And that was like with fossil critical art. It was a long time that you couldn't do anything except for the very esoteric corner. It's only recently that people are successful with, and then also this thing putting glacier ice into the middle of a gala of rich people is also, that's the thing that works. And so I think this is two ways of the really subtle influence of money, which you, like this one journalist, Olga Kronsteiner, she had the balls to just write it down, but then how could we, it's much more difficult than sponsorship. Yeah.
Maybe Anna, do you have any
I was just thinking about, I don't have like really I don't really have like an insight how far the influence really goes, but I also believe that some curators are still like free to do whatever they want and are not like really led by maybe the in that level of the directors. They are more connected to maybe the sponsors, but if a curator wants to make an exhibition with critical pieces of art, I don't think that one sponsor would come and say, okay, you have to kick out this artist. It's good that it's not like that in Austria, maybe in other countries, I don't know. But still, for sure, I think it has an influence who is sponsoring, not only for the visitors, but also inside the institution, probably, but not, maybe more in a subtle way, but not like that that there is in the sponsor contract. I think there is not written you're not allowed to exhibit this artist or something. You know,
No.
I cannot imagine. I don't know. Maybe it is, but I don't think so.
I think it's all unspoken, implicit. Everybody knows what's going on, but nobody's talking about it.
It would be interesting to see how it is with, for example, Staatsoper, because their main sponsor is OMV. But I don't know. I never talked to them.
How these systems maintain themselves.
Yeah.
It does get it gets interesting, and in many ways I think that through staying in the realm, for everyone staying comfortable, is how it stays the same. And so it was a great title for the original workshop that we went to, which was called Disobedience Makes History. And you can look back at all of the different kind of cultural movements, political movements that have made change happen, and a lot of the time something has to be pushed and broken and smashed, and you have to break through those coercions and those subtle censorships. And a lot of the time it's not visible when we are subtly censoring something. Things are subtly not approved because they are a little bit provocative, but no one's quite clear that they're actually feeling it's too difficult a work. And so I think in our case that was partly how we were prepared to do that. It felt necessary to be unsanctioned, because otherwise we would be, But I do feel like this is perhaps culturally, it's different in different countries. Like I do think in Austria, in some ways, the fact that OMV has just discreetly dropped its relationship with Leopold perhaps speaks of different pathways that are also possible. I don't know enough about Austrian culture for that. But the lessons that we saw from the inside in our case was that there was subtle censorship, which sometimes can be directly noticed, and other times it's more discreet. And but that so long as you were prepared to find a way to go beyond that, then you could start to get something happening, and then it would unravel itself. And so many voices that were thoroughly disapproving at the beginning and confronting us and outraged, 6-7 years later are trying to be our friends, And so that can only happen when we push through those edges a bit, I think, beyond censorship. And when there is something, if you do notice something that's censored, then you have to find a way to call it out, basically.
Because you said that in the case of Tate Gallery, only a very small percentage of the funding came from BP. Does anybody of you know how this is in Austria? Like, for example, the main sponsor of the Viennese opera, is this 50% of the budget, or is it 3% of the budget? Because I think this also creates a lot of leverage, because everything is under financial pressure, and if it's just a smaller amount, it's easier to push it to not be sponsored anymore than if it's just the main funding.
Yeah, is that known? Do you know?
Yes, it's public. The numbers are public.
Yeah, but do you know what percentage you're talking about?
Not really.
Yeah. No.
I knew it. And
I mean, that was one of the things that actually, you should look it up, but in the UK, that was one of the things that stopped that conversation progressing, was that it was censored. That we tried to say, like, no, it's commercially sensitive. And we were like, no. And then when we found out, they were like, what? You're getting all that profile for this tiny amount of money? And we're destroying the climate for it? No, this can't happen. But there is a real argument. People say, well, we need the money, therefore we have to take this money. And then you say, well, it's dirty. And they say, well, all money is dirty. And then before you know it, nothing changes.
Yeah, Mr. Whipplinger even told me that he needs the money in order to change the lighting to LED.
You'll hear all of this. You'll hear all these.
Yeah, but for the culture, I mean, there's never enough. Like, it's always like a bit of a precariat. So
there'll always be an excuse, and you just have to push and push and push.
That's been a very cheap try.
So they will always try to get money from. But I think that's the ethical responsibility also of a cultural institution, to then say, I really look at what I'm. Which money I take.
That would be another interesting thing that I would like to talk. But your question first, maybe. Huh?
It's a very tiny question. Because my question was once about the subtle thing and once about the more obvious. And since you, Anna, work with Werbefrei in public spaces, and then I thought about Kunsthaus Graz, which has this very visible thing, and you can like speak through it, right? So I was wondering if it was ever used like for
at the skin of the. Yeah, I think they used it. Also, and they were also like, we went to a solidarity protest in Graz with the Letzte Generation. And so I think a lot of museums, like within the last years, a lot of museums also get kind of political. And then there was also these museums for future. And then Leo told me a couple of days ago that they don't exist anymore. So I had also the feeling that some institutions really tried, but on the other hand, I also got the feeling now, at the moment, it changed a bit within the last years, the whole movement. Also this like Friday for Future demonstrations, they're not here, and it changed a bit, and it kind of shifted to different topics like wars, I don't know, other things, but I think a lot of museums still, also here in Vienna, the Kunsthaus Wien, they started really early to talk about this, and I think they were the first museum with that logo of the Österreichische Umweltzeichen, and they really tried to do something as museum, but it came more from inside the people that work there. And for like bigger houses that are not so interested, there are no real regulations or like guidelines who to work with. So it's still their choice of the museum. And then you have some that want to get sponsored by OMV and others don't like. I think I don't know, maybe smaller institutions that also probably need money, but are more, I don't know, have another mindset.
Yeah. I would like to talk about this decision, like how can we have a process for such institutions to take that decision, because there was from Max there was the question on where to draw the line, like if it's Erste Bank, a big bank in Austria, they also have they fund fossil projects and stuff. Yeah. But they also do very, very nice things. So do we all have to go without their nice money? And then
well, you just push that line, just keep pushing it. I mean, just wherever you can. That's what I would be saying.
What Milo Rauer and the Wiener Festwochen did, they came up with a Rat der Republik, so a council, a people's council of the Free Republic of Vienna. Yeah. And of course it was it's Realfiktion, so it's fiction, just like he does it all the time, Milo Rauer. But what they did is lots of different people with lots of different backgrounds, knowledges, beliefs, value systems, discussed on whose money can we take and whose money couldn't we take publicly. And they got experts and listened to different opinions, and then they discussed their feelings about it, and they made a very elaborate decision.
And what it was?
They take some dirty money, but not the very
all.
dirty money, and just for the good cause. And they really make it transparent, and they check on how the sponsorship influence what's happening. Very elaborate and yeah.
Well, it's a good start, and it's a good work to do this. It needs to be a public conversation. Let's have that conversation. You know, and it needs to be had in a public way, and that's a good way that culture can do it. But I think it needs to be pushed, and it needs to be scrutinised, and that's, I suppose, the realm where, if you ask me, artists and activists are well set to collaborate and create pressure to make sure that the ethical scrutiny is not just static, that it improves year on year until things are clean, and we progress our world with those actions.
I think in regards to that, I'll have one more question, but we're also kind of short on time, so just letting everyone know that it's 7:30 or almost 7:30. But if my panelists are willing to continue, I think we can also continue. But I'm just letting everyone know. And maybe, because one more question I'd have is, we're seeing all these lovely pictures, but I'd say most of them are around 10 years old.
It's old, yeah.
And the political landscape has changed, the discourse has changed. I mean, this was pre-Fridays for Future. You were like early on the climate discussion. The real avant-garde. And I don't know how you feel about it, Florian, because like discourse has changed around the climate movement.
It's gone. It's just gone.
This is not what we're talking about. We're not talking about the climate movement in general, we're talking about sponsorship. But maybe to all three of you, how do you see the question of like, shall we push this discourse on cultural fossil sponsorship, even if we are facing a right-wing government maybe in the next few years, etc., or not? Take positive.
Yeah.
Do we have a choice? We don't have. Do we have a choice? You know, the parts per million are going up and up and up and up. Whether it's left or right, it's going up, and that's everyone's problem. Our problem and our privileged situation. We're privileged, extremely privileged. To me, that puts a greater responsibility upon me to use my privilege, and so you've heard the story, bits of the story from Liberate Tate as a case study, and I think it's a good way to make the wider conversation that needs to happen in society progress around fossil fuels, around ethical stuff, ethical sponsorship, ethical money, get our act cleaner, but it's not. Look, you can see what's happening. It's not happening quick enough, and so I think focusing at culture, as you've heard me say, is one good way, not the only way, of course, but one good way that we can try and do a lot with not a lot, because it's because of the reach of culture as a progressive place, as a place of ideas, and works like what Milo Rao has done there within the realms of how far he can push his role as a festival organizer, but also as an artist, I found that inspiring. You know, he's doing something there. But I've also heard him put a call out to say, put pressure on us. We're doing what we can. We're up for change. The more pressure you put on us, and it was literally I've heard him inviting it. Put pressure on us to make this change happen quicker, and that's really up to us to get creative and get angry and get on it, if you ask me. We're not all able to do that, but actually the privilege that we have here oh, should we do something about the climate crisis? Like as opposed to the vulnerable communities across the world and the forests that are dying right now. Like, actually, responsibility on us when we listen to these wider voices is enormous, if you ask me.
Mm-hmm.
Lovely call to action.
Yeah, I think like even though your group doesn't exist anymore, it obviously had an impact when you said now Leopold dropped that cooperation and that whatever it is, but that sponsorship. And I think sometimes if someone goes with a good example, maybe others will follow, or maybe the general pressure, like you said in the UK in the beginning, it was just one, and then the others were like, maybe it's not so good if we have the same sponsors. And
I wouldn't say any of them went willingly. Everybody needs to kick up the ass.
They did? They needed it? Yeah.
Everybody.
Okay. Yeah, I don't know.
These guys are making a shitload of money, make no mistake. Yeah. And so for that to change, you have to chase them with a stick.
Maybe I'm too optimistic here.
Well, I mean, it's good. You can still be optimistic and you can still be friendly, but I mean, this is where you can come in as artists. You don't just have to be angry. You can come in and create beautiful trouble. Actually, there's a book came out from Graz called Beautiful Trouble. No, it's not from Graz. That one. That's something else.
Yeah, I can just speak for our association also. There were in the beginning there were just a few cities that really banned that fossil ads, and now they're getting more and more and more. And then other cities see they had the opportunity to do it, and I think that's also important too. As you said, we don't have so much time anymore, so all the small steps are something good. Yeah. Was my feeling.
Yeah.
And culture is one part of it, and yeah.
It's great. I mean, I don't want to be off-putting by saying you have to the only way is to smash the system. It's not the only way. It's kind of both, isn't it? You want to encourage, if you've had good actions, you want to encourage that, of course. But I think there's an opportunity if OMV have been dropped from one cultural institution. There's a real opportunity there to, do some nice conversations to encourage that. But if that's at the same time as that, there's also another group being more militant and more edgy, more creative. That way you can look at the profile you got through what you did. If you chuck oil in the gallery, everybody's looking. That makes the conversation happen. If at the same time you can create, why don't you just come this way and just look, these guys have done it. It's a bit of both, I guess.
Mm-hmm. Just one question. Just can you explain what fossil advertisement? So which companies should be banned, or what advertisement should be banned?
Most
where it start, where it end.
That's also something we were discussing as well, and I think also Leo was at more meetings with other groups that have the same goal. Yeah. But in general, it mainly focuses now on airlines, car industry, oil industry, the obvious. Yeah. But for sure, if you think bigger, then it has to be the meat industry, or I don't know, plastic, whatever. But these are the ones that really, the big polluters that really are also seen in public spaces a lot. You see car advertisements for airlines everywhere. So, yeah.
It's always where it starts, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's what we take away from this. It's the same in the cultural scenes. How do you...
And just whom do you comment also, the OMV, the Staatsoper is the last big institution with OMV sponsor. All others dropped them already. The Großhistorische Museum, so
they haven't dropped them completely.
Not completely.
Not completely, yeah.
As a general sponsor.
Yeah. We should think about something. For Staatsoper.
and the contract of the Staatsoper is running out, I guess, this year or next year or something.
Okay.
Oh, they're also terminating.
They don't know if it will be prolonged.
Okay.
But the next big
we're going to tell them.
So we had a similar situation that it was about, will they renew? And we were we need to keep the pressure up to make sure that they don't renew. And so that's good news to hear it, but I do think that it's...
And the sponsoring in the Staatsoper is around between 10 and 14%.
10 and 14.
10 and so around 10 to 15. So the
10 to 15.
budget
Yeah.
of the startup is 170 million. So 10% is sponsoring.
Sponsoring in general.
Yeah.
Okay, that's a bit more than the UK, but so there you go. But that's the story is that the UK has a greater reliance on it, but actually it's the other way around. So it's good to know those figures, but.
Yeah, can I have the last words now?
May I ask a question? If you don't. What about pushing for plain packaging? Like I think it's Ireland. You have cigarettes are plain packaged. You cannot use the logo big and colorful and loud. It has to be smoking is bad for your health, all black and blunt, and maybe a small logo. Most of these BP and everyone try to take green colors and like very mellow colors and make it feel like it's a nice and bright future. Why not push for the oil companies should use plain packaging? Since the pollutants, there is particle pollution, there is heavy metal pollution coming out of it, it's causing cancer, it's pretty much similar to smoking. It's necessary evil for some people, but it is not a healthy solution to have oil around drinking or burning or whatever. Pushing for plain packaging would be a good option. Maybe the current generation will remember with the logo, colors and stuff. The next generation which is coming up within 10 years, no one cares whether it's OMV or Eni or this or that. It's petrol, it's diesel. And I believe, and also it will be related with evil things or bad things or dirty things when you have plain packaging, just like smoking. Would be a nice option, in my view.
It's a step on the way. Does that come into some of your thinking?
Yeah, I mean it's a bit where the whole ban fossil ads started, because they said, okay, once there was all these like smoking commercials and then it was banned because it was something bad, and now it's very normal and you still can buy cigarettes. It's not like totally forbidden, but not the advertisement is not here anymore. And that's more or less the same what we want as well. So if that's banned from public spaces, all the advertisements, that probably has an impact.
Usage will be a little lower. It won't go to zero, but the usage will be a little lower, which is still better.
And then they don't have the opportunity to represent themselves as bright future, everything's good, whatever. If there is no billboard for them anymore, so. But I don't know, Leo, you want to say something to that? And
maybe about a little lower. I think it's really important to see the scale of it. This is something, while banning the ads or also taking back the sponsorship, is something that is really comparably easy to do. We cannot get rid of all fossil-driven cars from one day to the other. We cannot stop all the flights from one day to the other. But it's really easy possible to change this system of creating demand and creating certainties of certain products within society. So I think banning those ads and driving back this sponsorship is something, well, it won't solve the whole problem, and still people will consume those things. But even if it's possible to drive down the demand for 3, 4 or 5%, like with tobacco ads, this really is a big number. And it's super efficient compared to how little you have to do for it. So of course there are other ways and other things to protest or to block a street and so on. Those are all valuable things to do, but it might be comparably harder to do that or to be successful to block a mine, for example, for just a few hours. The mine will then continue to work, but I think asking for driving back the ads really has an impact.
Maybe, as we are kind of all sitting here for quite some time, maybe some last thoughts or last open questions that can of course also be discussed between people after. but I do think we all need a bit of a break. The air is going up, so we're kind of in the stuffy zone.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe someone has any last thoughts or any last questions from the audience. Maybe also some people that haven't asked questions yet. But there's no pressure.
I just want to say one thing. Being from Austria but having lived in the UK for a while, what was really nice to see was I feel like every country has their own journey with a system change, with changing a collective social narrative around oil sponsorship of the arts. What was really impressive to see with Liberate, but also with other groups that joined in, was that slowly the collective narrative shifted across the city or across art institution in general. And now it's shameful to have an oil sponsorship, more or less, because the narrative has changed. And I feel like a lot of us art institutions around the world have taken inspiration just from these small groups. But I feel like Austria needs to find their own way, keeping the pressure up, finding creative ways of protesting. Yeah, that's all I want to say.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's lovely closing words, in case there's no other immediate points, because I do think that we could open a lot of boxes now, but then we would be here until the weekend probably. But I also encourage everyone to continue this conversation maybe in a more comfortable way, because this building is open for a bit more.
Yeah, I would just close to say, I just think keep the conversations going, but raise them and realise that there is an opportunity and there is a responsibility, and that it doesn't take too much. If you can find ways to have the conversations, but keep having some gatherings and meetings and presentations, and find a way to have this conversation at Wiener Festwochen, get on the programme, then this conversation can soon become a group and a collective and an action, and then that helps generate some energy that can help push this forward. And from everything that I can hear, I think there's some good opportunities, and there's some good characters, and just a little bit of just keeping the conversation bubbling. Another one of these events means that you can inspire action.
So one thought that I want to share is that we also, one success of Letzte Generation in Austria was that we did the better advertisement for our cause, because it was like, for many people it was really interesting what we did at a very low cost that we had. It was mainly super glue and some fines from police, but like going in and just showing, like what we did, in my understanding, is we showed our like how desperate we really are about the situation by performing it on the street, and that was a very good advertisement for climate anxiety, climate desperation that many people could relate to, and I guess I would like to find a way to go even one step further and find a constructive way of coping with climate collapse in a collective way. And I'm thinking about ways of advertising this. But that's my last thought.
My last thought is that, advertisement and sponsorship is a critical point, as we all saw today, and especially for cultural institutions, I think it should be more of a topic who they take as a sponsor and not. And as Festwochen did, and also other cultural institutions, I think they're is hopefully something going on within the next years. But as you said, maybe it's not enough that change comes from within. Maybe it needs also activism. I don't know. We will see how it develops. But yeah.
Maybe if people are inspired, you can watch the movies or films or other footage that has been mentioned about previous fights in the UK, and maybe we get inspired and we see you again to discuss this topic at some point in the future, or maybe we take action ourselves. Thank you very much for coming.
Thank you.
And thank you.